Good evening. My name is Lindsay Oldensky, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the 7th Annual Harvard International Development Conference. I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's forum, which is also the opening event for this weekend's conference. We'd like to thank IOP, the Institute of Politics, for co-sponsoring this evening's event. The 2001 International Development Conference focuses on partnerships between the public, private, nonprofit, and international sectors, which have concretely and successfully delivered results in developing countries. In tonight's opening forum, we are honored to have with us Professor Jeffrey Sachs and President Leonel Fernandez. Tomorrow's conference will feature Michael Fairbanks, CEO of On the Frontier, and Jorge Quiroga Ramirez, Vice President of Bolivia, as well as almost 40 other international leaders from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who will be introducing President Fernandez, is a Galen L. Stone Professor of International Trade and Director of the Center for International Development at Harvard University. Professor Sachs also serves as Chairman of the Commission on Macroeconomics and Health for the World Health Organization, Co-Chairman of the Advisory Board of the Global Competitiveness Report, and has been a consultant to the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, and the United Nations Development Program. Professor Sachs's most recent book is a textbook entitled Macroeconomics in the Global Economy. Professor Sachs has received his BA from Harvard College and his MA and PhD from Harvard University. We are pleased and honored to include him as a part of this year's conference. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Sachs.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to have the chance to kick off this 7th annual International Development Conference. And I think the most exciting part of this is that it is run by students throughout this university at the Kennedy School and the Business School and together with the Fletcher School of Diplomacy. And it is every year building in interest, momentum, scale. I understand that it's the registrations are 50% higher this year than last year, if not more, and it all shows the incredible interest and commitment of the students to development and the growth of thinking and concern at this university and in our community about international development. It's also thrilling that we have some wonderful leaders here with us. The gentleman that I'll be introducing in a moment, and before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about what he accomplished. And also tomorrow, Vice President Quiroga of Bolivia, an outstanding leader of a country that has really pioneered many, many areas of economic reform and economic development with dramatic accomplishments in very difficult circumstances. So there's going to be a lot to learn from our guests to this campus. The theme is also a terrific theme, the theme of international partnerships for development. I'm going to give a couple of examples where the general principle that development cannot be accomplished in any single way, whether it's the market focus or a social focus, without an intense concentration on partnership, on division of labor and responsibility between different sectors, really comes to the fore. And some of the very exciting developments this week at Harvard, where our whole community engaged in making proposals about the AIDS crisis and what could be done about it, are examples that I want to that I would like to briefly describe before we get to the main act. I'm just the warm-up, you understand, but what a nice place it is to be. We have with us as our guest tonight and guest of honor, and in a return performance to the forum, one of the great success stories of international development of the 1990s. President Leonel Fernandez was the president during and substantial cause of one of the most rapid rates of economic growth in the world during his term as president between 1996 and and the year 2000. The success was so astounding, I have to say, that I found that virtually everybody on my staff wanted to go down and advise the Dominican Republic. I knew that part of the reason was, of course, the chance to meet President Fernandez, but we found out the real truth when one of our colleagues who nearly caused everyone to pummel him with envy when he returned, sent us an email of him standing next to Pedro Martinez during the off season. So you'll have the whole institute ready to go down to Santo Domingo as long as the off season is on, and many ready to devote themselves year-round to your wonderful country, Mr. President. The DR, the Dominican Republic, has been one of the great success stories, but it also poses an intellectual puzzle for us that I want to highlight. Because as everybody knows, the Dominican Republic sits on an island shared with another country, with Haiti, which has been one of the most tragic cases of failure of economic development as well for 200 years of independence. And this raises all sorts of questions. If, like me, you're a little bit obsessed with geography these days, clearly geography can't be the story of an island divided between a success story and economic retrogression. And so we need some deep explanations and some deep reflections. I mentioned that the Dominican Republic was one of the great success stories of the 1990s, and we expect that it will continue that way. During the period of the 1990s, the DR grew at about 6% per year. And that means that by the so-called rule of 70, which we study here, divide 70 by 6, and you find out that every 11 years, the Dominican Republic would be doubling its income. Now, at the same time that this was happening, if you look at the western side of the island, Haiti, on this shared island of Hispaniola, Haiti was declining in absolute terms at 1.7% per year. And if you use the rule of 70, you find out every 35 years it would be shrinking in half if it continues that rate. And tragically, it has been diminishing in real economic terms for a generation or more. Both countries have about 8 million people, so it's not size. It's probably not geography in the world. And yet, Dominican Republic has now achieved a life expectancy of 73 years, which is pretty good by any standard, whereas Haiti is struggling with life expectancy of 52 years still on the same island. Dominican Republic made tremendous progress in human investments in health and education. Illiteracy rates have come down to around 15% of the adult population, whereas in Haiti, they're more than 50% still. Export growth from Dominican Republic was more than 7% per year. In other words, exports more than doubling every 10 years. And in Haiti, exports were basically stagnant, growing 1 or 2% a year at best during the 1990s. Both countries, sadly, however, even with the successes, both countries are struggling with the AIDS pandemic right now, facing some of the worst challenges in the Americas, to be sure, and in the world outside of sub-Saharan Africa. Again, Haiti in worse shape, with more than 5% of the adult population HIV infected, but in Dominican Republic, a very serious crisis also, with almost 3% of the adult population HIV infected right now. So, as is often true of development, no matter how much one has achieved and how dramatic the success, and I should add that Dominican Republic was the fastest growing country in the entire world in the mid-1990s, with a growth rate of 11.7% in a single year in President Fernandez's first year in office, 1996 to 97. So that's quite an accomplishment. But even there, we still have a lot of people in need and a real health crisis, which we know can destabilize societies and cause incredible human pain as well as social destabilization and even economic crisis. What can we say about these two examples, though, in broad terms? How can one be so successful and the other in so much turmoil? Of course, we know that politics has had a huge amount to do with it. The fact that Dominican Republic was able to produce a president like President Fernandez and has had political and social stability, at least in relative terms and in quite strong terms in the last decade, has been a big part of the story. But what I want to highlight about development as you think about the issues of partnership in the next 2 days is that a success story like Dominican Republic or the counterpart of a failure like Haiti highlights that development has two fundamental pillars, and success depends on achieving both of them. One of the fundamental pillars is the social dimension, and that is achieving high levels of education for children, high levels of health that can produce a life expectancy of 73 years. And it also highlights how critical it is to get the AIDS epidemic in Dominican Republic and Haiti under control in order to be able to maintain the economic progress. Dominican Republic has invested in its people and has produced these favorable outcomes. That, it would be nice to say, would be enough for economic development, but it rarely is. Because people that are educated and that grow up healthy want to have jobs, or they flee their countries and the best people leave. For people to stay, for people to help build their countries, we require the second fundamental pillar of economic development, and that is economic growth through a business environment that creates the foundations for investment and technological advance. And what's so exciting about Dominican Republic, and what I was able to see when I had the pleasure to visit President Fernandez when he was in office late in the 1990s, was the booming business sector, also in partnership of many sorts, but most importantly, perhaps in that sense, partnership between U.S. firms and Dominican Republic firms that were building a real economic base in tourism, in manufacturing, in information technology services, which were making it possible to achieve this decade doubling of exports, which was the real fuel of economic progress. So while the Dominican Republic had both of those engines of development working, the human side and the economic growth business environment side, next door to the west in Haiti, on the other side of the island, both of those gears were turning in the wrong direction. On the one side, you had political instability and collapse, and that meant that it was impossible to focus on the most crucial and even minimally needed investments in health and education. And the extent of impoverishment is utterly tragic as a result, and the failure of Haiti, which needs development so urgently to help its people stay alive, much less to begin to enjoy some benefits of our growing world economy, have not yet been achieved. Now, how to make both of these pillars, both of these engines of growth work is really the question that you'll face in the next couple of days, and that I'm sure we'll hear a lot of wisdom about in just a moment when I stop. In both areas, you require partnerships. In the case of health, for example, and I'll just say a word about the AIDS pandemic right now because it is relevant for Dominican Republic, for our hemisphere, but especially for Africa, where prevalence is 20% of the adult population. This cannot be solved without an absolutely committed international partnership that includes governments in the rich countries, governments in the poor countries, civil society, academic institutions like Harvard pairing up with academic institutions within the hard-hit countries, and industry, and in this case the pharmaceutical company doing their part to give the drugs that are needed at production cost to poor countries that are facing this challenge. That partnership has been 20 years in the making, and it hasn't yet been brought to fruition. And I'm so proud of the students here for the incredible activism that they're showing in recent months in particular in helping to educate Americans and helping as activists and as student scholars to push the partnership forward. Tomorrow we'll have an important session on that. We're that close. With a little bit more energy and push, I really think we're going to make a difference this year. On the side of economic growth, we need the partnerships as well. Part of those partnerships is just business-to-business relations. If there's one thing I've learned in the business side in 20 years of studying economic growth and economic development is that there is no country in the world that can make it on its own. That includes the United States, by the way, even if it thinks it can often. But certainly no country outside of the United States can muster the technology, the global markets, the expertise that is needed to make the breakthroughs into technology-based economic development on its own. So partnerships with business to business are absolutely vital. And that's why it was so heartening to see in the Dominican Republic the amount of U.S. foreign direct investment coming into the island, helping to build up sectors that could really create jobs, raise incomes, raise living standards, give prospects for children to go to school and to get educations, and then to stay in the country as skilled workers, building the country in the future. But markets, even on the business side, are not enough. And that's why I'm very happy that the students have put on a number of sessions tomorrow about even non-market or semi-market government-private partnerships on how to spur technological development in poor countries where technology can provide a great deal of the difference in what lies ahead. We are thrilled, Mr. President, that the Center for International Development is working with you on information technology and on extending what benefits that can to speed even more the successful development that you have helped to get underway. The agenda is full. We are, without further ado, at the real moment of opening this conference. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you the former president and, dare I say, future president of the Dominican Republic. President Fernandez, I'm a little bit, I don't know how to say it, but we're the same age, and you've been president, here I am introducing you. So that's pretty good for you, but you make me feel a little bit bad on that. President Fernandez was born around the same time I was, and he received his Doctor of Law with honors in 1978, proceeded to become a political leader and intellectual leader in his country and in the region, with a long list of major books that he published to help educate all of us. In 1996, he won the presidency, something that I think heartened all of the Americas, and true to all of our expectations, the 4 years of President Fernandez's administration were a tremendous success that, as I've stressed, put the country on a path of very rapid economic development. The rule, which I think is even not a bad rule for most countries in the world, is you serve your term and you can't get reelected immediately. There's a lot more to come, that's for sure. But in this brief hiatus, President Fernandez is heading a foundation which he has established, the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development. It's with that foundation that we at Harvard are working in our very great honor and pleasure, and it's my great honor now to present President Leonel Fernandez to you.
Well, thank you, Professor Sachs, for your kind introduction. I just was hoping that perhaps one of the members of my staff at the Foundation Global Democracy and Development was taping your words so that when you said future president with the endorsements of Harvard, it might be a landslide. I also like to say hello to President Yamil Mawat from Ecuador and Governor Rosselló. I'm very happy to see you here today. Very surprised too, I should say. And also very happy to know that the Boston Red Sox won today. And that perhaps one of the reasons was the home run by my compatriot, Manny Ramirez. So very glad to hear that. And Professor Sachs, I very gladly change places with you. If you want to be president of the Dominican Republic, I'll take your place, all right? Well, today I would like to share with you some thoughts about partnership building and democracy and development in the third world, especially in Latin America, and maybe share with you some of our experiences with this. 20 years ago, a democratic transition began to take place in Latin America. We're coming from authoritarian regimes, dictatorships, military regimes, and then making a transition to democratic regimes. This was not the first time it happened in Latin America. Right after independence in the 19th century, Latin American nations declared themselves as democratic. They established democratic institutions. We copied all the constitutional norms from France, the United States, but then all this collapsed. And we tried again, and it collapsed again. So through the years, Latin American countries have gone from authoritarian regimes to democratic and back and forth. So when this latest transition took place 20 years ago, the question was, is this going to be permanent, or are we going to swing back again into an authoritarian regime? And now some people are becoming very concerned with what is happening in the Andean region. President Mawat can illustrate us even more deeply on this, but in his own country, in Ecuador, he was elected for a 4-year term. He was not able to finish his term. And there is still a situation of upheaval in Ecuador. But also there is a lot of questioning about what is going on in Venezuela, or Peru, or Bolivia, or Colombia. So there's like a crisis building up in the whole Andean region. And now the question of Haiti. A newly elected president again, President Aristide, and the question is, will he be able to finish his term? So once again, we're going back to the question, is this democratic transition, is it going to be permanent, or are we going to go back again to an authoritarian regime? Well, I would say to answer this, the main question is the relationship between democracy and development, and specifically the relationship between capitalist economic development and democracy. Because even though there has been a lot of academic debate about this relationship between capitalist economic development and democracy, and some would say there's not a mechanical relationship because you might have democratic institutions and not be developed economically from a capitalist perspective, the reality is that when you look through history, all successful democratic regimes have had a capitalist economic platform. You might have a market economy without democracy, like Singapore or South Korea, but it is very difficult to have a democracy without a market economy. So I would say the first thing is this. Democracy has not been able to consolidate in Latin America over the years because it has lacked a capitalist economic development. So what is expected in Latin America right now is the realization of a capitalist revolution. It was said in the 60s, in the 50s, that what was needed to guarantee development was a socialist revolution. We now discover is the other way around. What we need is a capitalist revolution. Now, why is this? Formally, we have adopted a constitution. We have legal codes. Sometimes we respect all these legal norms. But there is a contradiction. There is a tension between our democratic political institutions and our social configuration. There is the problem in Latin America. And with the last democratic transition, what we can say is this. It didn't take place because all of a sudden Latin America became developed economically. It happened for other reasons. First, because the military dictatorships were violating human rights. And there was an international condemnation coming from Europe, coming from the United States, especially during President Carter's term, to reject these abuses in Latin America. So that's one reason. First, because there was widespread human rights abuses in those countries. Secondly, because there was an economic crisis. There was hyperinflation. There was a problem with the currencies, devalued currencies, low growth, high unemployment. And then all this made the military understand that they were not capable of managing the economic crisis at the time. And thirdly, I would say what made it possible, what made this democratic transition possible, was that a new consensus was built among the political actors in those countries affected with dictatorships, because the idea of from capitalism to socialism was transformed into something more concrete that was from dictatorship to democracy. So the contradiction, capitalism, socialism, was solved being more pragmatic in what can be achieved in terms of making a change from dictatorships into democracy, especially from intellectuals and political parties from the left. So I would say those three main ideas, human rights abuses, economic crisis, and a consensus to go from dictatorships to democracy, was what made possible the transition to democratic regimes at the end of the 70s and during the 1980s. So it was not because Latin American countries were developed economically, and then in a natural way, we were able to establish democratic institutions. It worked the other way around. Elected civil leaders came to governments, and they began applying measures from IMF and all adjustment programs that were able to control hyperinflation and somehow make the economy start moving again. And then market-oriented economic policies were also enforced, and some progress was made. Economic growth took place in Latin America for a couple of years. The hyperinflation disappeared. Jobs were created. New opportunities were coming. Up until 1994, when the Mexican peso crisis hit the region, and then in 1997, 1998, with the impact of the Asian crisis in Latin America. After this, it has been a different situation. But I would say, from the military heritage until the mid-90s, tremendous improvement was made through the adjustment programs, and then with the market-oriented policies, the Washington Consensus that was applied in Latin America. Nowadays, I hear a lot of criticism. People saying the Washington Consensus or market-oriented policies were a failure. And I would say it accomplished certain goals. It was able to overcome the economic crisis of the 70s and the 80s. Now, there is something that the Washington Consensus guidelines or market-oriented policies have not been able to achieve in Latin America nor elsewhere, is the social inequality problem, is the marginalization and exclusion of many sectors of society into the modernization process in Latin America. And here's where we're having the problems now, because with a modernization process taking place within a globalization context, where there is a rising of expectations, where people now are demanding more, wanting more, because they see it on TV, because they see it on the media, because they have it now in their own neighborhoods. Before they didn't have McDonald's or Wendy's, but now they have it in their own neighborhoods, and they want to be part of that. But the economic system simply excludes them from being part of this process. And so they are turning to the streets to protest and requesting to be part of this transformation that has been taking place in Latin America. But then the problem is this. with lack of economic development and without a clear redistributive fiscal policy, these sectors have been excluded, and there is no possibility that democracy can be consolidated if this tension between lack of economic development and social inequality cannot be solved. And so this is where we think lies the agenda for Latin America in the coming years. I think four main issues have to be solved. First, democratic governability, which will mean, first, to proceed with state reform, judicial reform, being more transparent in administrative government processes, establish better relationship between the executive and legislative branches, deconcentration of power, decentralization, more power towards the municipalities, more deconcentration between the executive and the rest of the population. This is from, I would say, some of the measures needed to guarantee the democratic governability. Second would be economic development, which basically is a strategy for competitiveness. And this will have to go in two ways from our modest point of view. First, related to the domestic market. There are some sectors of the economy that are not very competitive internationally, but do make a difference on the domestic market. Agriculture and livestock, for example. I would say in the Dominican Republic, as Professor Sachs, I was going to say President Sachs, as he said, at some point we had an 11% GDP growth. And then I would go to one of the provinces, and I would say, how are things going here? And they would say, very bad. I would say, how is this? Because what I read is that the country is moving in the right direction, and you're telling me things are bad here. He says, yes, because here we live on our tomato plantations, and we're not doing well with tomatoes this period, so the economy is not doing well here. I would go to another province. They depended basically on rice production. If rice was not doing well, then the economy there was not doing well. At some other place, they would raise some other, they would raise coffee or tobacco, and if tobacco was not doing well, then in that place the economy was in ruin, was in real bad shape. So I understood in a very practical manner that you have to pay attention to domestic markets. And if there is an important sector of the population that depends on commodities and products that are directed to the domestic market, then attention should be put on this, even though they're not competitive on a global economy. So the other thing would be being competitive on the international economy. We have to reorient our economy to become export-oriented, yes. And then there is a question of integration. There is a process of integration in Latin America, but on a sub-regional level. You have Mercosur in the Southern Cone. You have the Andean Pact in the Andean region. You have the Central American integration system in Central America. You have CARICOM in the Caribbean. And then now you have the initiative of the Americas, the FTAA, which is promoted by the US and calls for a hemispheric integration by the year 2005. So in order to become competitive on the world market, Latin American countries will have to first be part of a sub-regional integrational scheme, and then also follow up on the free trade agreement of the Americas that is being promoted by the US and will be part of the agenda at the Quebec summit that will take place sometime this month. Increase production, increase productivity, low cost, integrate information technology as part of strategic economic development for our nations is part of this competitiveness. We have to complete the tasks that we still have pending from the Industrial Revolution and go on with the new economy or digital economy simultaneously in Latin America. If we think that we can proceed only with industrialization, after we complete this, we are still way back the industrialized, the well-developed nations. So we have to approach these two matters at the same time, the old economy and the new economy all at the same time. Third element is the social inequality question that we have to address. And this can only be addressed, as I said, if we have economic development. And secondly, if there is a fiscal reform that can establish a progressive fiscal policy and therefore have enough resources to finance the access of large sectors of the population to the educational system, the health system, social security, create jobs and housing, especially for the poor. And the fourth element of this agenda, I would say, is national and regional identity, which means that we cannot ignore globalization. Globalization is not something that you should be arguing about. It's a fact of reality. But the thing is that you will have to integrate within a globalized world without losing your own national or regional identity. So that means that this you'll have to approach first by consolidating the values and factors of your nation state, of your nationality, and then diversifying in this multicultural world which represents globalization. So we have these 4 points for what would be a national and a regional agenda, going from democratic governability, second, economic development through competitiveness, third, social inequality, addressing the issue of social inequality, and fourth, maintaining national and regional identity. Now, how can this be done? A government by itself will never succeed with this agenda. It will have to incorporate other actors, which means basically political parties, the opposition, which will have to be very tolerant to include the opposition, all opposition into this dialogue. You will have to include church leaders, civil society, the international community, yes, and all actors that have an interest and a concern for national development and democratic governability. We had an experience in the Dominican Republic about this, and we had a vision of how this should be done. We think that even if an administration is successful, due to the alternance in democratic governments, every 4 years elections, and maybe the opposition wins, if someone else comes, they will want to change everything the previous administration did, and then you lose sense of continuity. And you need to have some permanent policy established in order to be successful. So democracy has this problem that there is an alternance every 4 years, policies might be changed. So we need, even though there is political competition, we need a set of goals that can be permanently carried out. And this cannot be done if there isn't a pact, an agreement between the political actors. If you see Singapore or Taiwan or South Korea, they were able to carry out their policies for a long time because they didn't have elections. So they were able to follow up on a economic development strategy without the problems created by alternance in a democratic process. But we're doing it within a democratic framework. We're going to have elections every 4 years. And it's possible that someone will want to change the policies of the previous administration. Now, in order to guarantee sustainable policies over the years, then an agreement must be made. Between whom? Between public sector, between political parties, political leaders, civil society, and everyone involved in public life in our nations. Now, the methodology about doing this, I have seen in some countries that they call for national dialogues. But in those national dialogues, the only ones who participate are the elites, the academic elites, the political elites, and people feel that they have been left out. And so even though maybe those policies represent the aspirations and ideals of the popular masses, since they were not convoked, they do not feel part of it. Because one of the things we notice nowadays is that people not only want to share ideas, they want to be part of the idea making and also be part of the implementation of those ideas. We're coming more into a participatory democracy. People really want to be engaged and participate actively. You can be doing the right thing, but they were not consulted, so they will revolt. So what we did is, let's do it some other way. Instead of having meetings with the elites of society, why not have a national dialogue with the whole population, the whole organized civic society? And so we had a national dialogue in the Dominican Republic, and we convoked all civil society. So we were able to have a dialogue with about 3 million people through their representatives for a period of about 5 months. And we came up with a proposal on the 15 most important and pressing issues for Dominican Republic in the years to come. And after we discussed all this and debated all this and came up with a final document that was submitted to them and agreed upon, then we were able to go to the political parties and say, this is what the people want, this is sound. It has been also consulted with the technicians, with the experts in each field, and if we can agree upon this, then we'll have a national strategy for development. We were unable to have an agreement with the other political parties, but I think this is something that is pending for the Dominican Republic and for Latin America. Political actors must be able to sit, discuss, debate, and come up with a national plan. Everyone committed to the implementation of this plan. And I do hope that at some point in the future, we'll be able to carry out from where we left with this national dialogue in the Dominican Republic and make this agreement come through and then guarantee on a long-term basis economic development for our country, which will then mean consolidating democracy also for the Dominican Republic. If this model works for the Dominican Republic, then I think it will also work for other countries in Latin America. Thank you very much.
We have microphones, 2, is it? Not up above? No, okay, we have 2 mics here, and what I would like people to do is to stand. We request questions, not speeches. Please identify yourself beforehand. I want to thank the President for very wise remarks. I've often thought the other approach to continuity is if you can somehow get the country pointed in the right direction, create institutions that create complete political gridlock so that nothing can ever change. That's one theory of the United States. Somehow we got lucky in the right direction, and then you can't move anything in Washington. So that's a different approach to alternates. So we have people starting to line up. Please introduce yourselves, and I'd ask you please to be brief on the questions.
My name is Eric. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. President Fernandez, I'm from Haiti. How do you think the Dominican Republic would partner with Haiti to help Haiti move away from the current political and economic turmoil it's facing, particularly as the situation deteriorates, the Dominican Republic will feel the demographic pressure of Haitian economic refugees?
You know, for a time looking at you, I thought you were Dominican. Right. Well, the situation in Haiti is very difficult, as Professor Sachs knows because he's been there recently. I was there in November. I spoke to President Aristide, and I know it is a very difficult situation. First of all, because he is facing a problem of governability. He does not have at this time international recognition, and there is a questioning by the opposition of the legitimacy of his victory. So he has a deep political problem in Haiti at this point. And of course, this is going to hurt the economy, as has been happening in Haiti for some time. Now, you will say, why hasn't Haiti collapsed then? I will just give you a testimony of what I think. While being in Haiti in November of last year, of 2000, I would go to the streets and I would see brand new cars, 1998, 1999 in Port-au-Prince. I will see that they were building houses there and new shopping centers. And then I was really stunned. I would say I had another impression of what was going on in Haiti. And there's an informal economy which is very active and very dynamic. Now, Haiti has not collapsed because of drug trafficking. Haiti has become a narco state. And now we're seeing even that Colombian families are establishing in Haiti to continue with drug trafficking within the region. So this is an interesting case of a country that has not totally collapsed because of illegal drug trafficking in the area. Now, this is not sustainable. It will not be allowed because it's illegal. The drug enters into the Dominican Republic before coming into the U.S. continental mainland. So when this happens, then the situation in Haiti is really going to be very, very difficult. Eventually, the U.S. will have to intervene at some point because when there is a problem in Haiti, first they press to cross the border into the Dominican Republic, but finally they end in Florida. And when boat people coming from Haiti end in Florida, then it becomes a question of national security for the U.S. And then that means at some point the U.S. will have it as a priority issue in its Latin American agenda and have some sort of presence in Haiti. But I think until you come up with an agreement between the political forces in Haiti, the problem first is political. You have to solve the political problem before you have the space to consider the economic issues. So right now, I think Haiti is a case to pay very close attention to, because even whatever happens in Haiti, it can spill over to the rest of Latin America.
Hi, President Fernandez. My name is Hector Bladuel. I'm a Puerto Rican student at the Kennedy School. And clearly, I share your vision that economic growth is not everything that is needed for development. I see it as a precondition for development. And I would like to ask you the specific policies that the Dominican Republic imposed to bridge the gap between rich and poor, alleviate poverty, social inequality, and also in terms of combating corruption and strengthening the judicial system, which I think are also important things that need to be addressed for real development to happen, not just economic growth.
Well, I was kind of lucky when I came into office because some of the reforms were already in place. They began by the administration of President Balaguer beginning the 90s, 1991 more or less. So they were already in place, those reforms. I was able to go into a second generation of reforms that had a good impact. Now, even though there is a lot of debate going on in Latin America about how to alleviate poverty, and many administrations concentrate on social programs, I would say what really will alleviate poverty in the long run if you have economic growth. If your economy can grow 8% every year, you will generate employment, you will create opportunities that are not there. So I would say, even though it is not sufficient, the first condition you will need is to have economic growth. And then after that, you will need to consider redistributive policies. How to prevent that the wealth created be concentrated in few hands, which has been the problem in all Latin America and is becoming greater within the globalization process, that the new wealth created is being concentrated ever more in fewer hands. And this problem, I think, can only be solved through fiscal policies. You have to tax the rich in order to somehow create investments, have resources to invest in the different social sector areas. There are also special programs that some countries apply in Mexico, Bolivia, elsewhere. But I think the core thing lies in guaranteeing economic growth, having sound fiscal policies, and a clear social program that addresses basically the issue of education and healthcare.
I'm Alessia Rodriguez, a research fellow here at the Kennedy, originally from Venezuela. I would like to hear your opinion. You very well explained the transition we've gone in Latin America between dictatorship and democracy. And in the case in Venezuela, as you're very well aware, we have a sort of a dictatorship hidden behind an appearance of democracy. And that is a big danger in our region, not only in our country. So I would like to hear your opinion on the implications for Venezuela and for Latin America on that, given that recently there are a lot of discussions on a coup d'etat and most probably military regime into place, given the discontent of democracy reaching market orientation successfully. Thank you.
Well, Venezuela is an interesting case because 5 different types of elections have taken place since President Chavez took office, and he has won all of them. And all the polls that are taken in Venezuela indicate that he has at least 60% of support, especially from the very poor.
Especially if you manipulate figures.
He's being basically confronted from middle class and upper class sectors of the population. Now, why is this? Everyone feels a little bit frightened about the future of Venezuela. Everyone can almost anticipate a confrontation, a political confrontation somewhere in the future. But President Chavez keeps commanding high support. And the question is, why is this? And I would say it has to do more with the past than what he is doing right now. I think people support Chavez not because they know what Chavez is going to do, but because they reject the past. I think this is basically what's happening in Venezuela. The Copellanos, the Adecos, etc., in a period when Venezuela was obtaining a lot of revenues through oil sales, people understood that this was taken from them, that corruption destroyed the political system in Venezuela. So when this happens and there is a collapse of the political system, especially political parties, a messianic, charismatic figure can come and take place and for a while hold the attention of the people, even though he doesn't have a clear plan of where he intends to go. I personally know President Chavez. We are good friends. I think he, in personal terms, I think he's a great individual. I do think he lacks a strategic vision of the future for his country. I think he still uses the symbols of the 60s, the revolutionary symbols of Fidel Castro, Saddam Hussein, etc., when we're living a different world. And so this creates a tension within the Venezuelan society that cannot be solved if there isn't a national dialogue in Venezuela among the different actors and you agree on a pattern of economic growth and social justice for the country.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Basil Nwebara, recently graduated from MIT. Listening to what you said, it came to my realization that what you described was industrialization without development. And what you are trying to tell us is that there's a way to push industrialization and development to the same playing field. And my fear is, how could you do that without risking the industries migrating from your area and the rich getting out of your country? Because after all, they are there because of the advantage they have than going to another country. So what I'm asking in essence is, to what extent could we make multinational corporations responsible in the activities in these countries? Thank you.
Well, politics is always a risky business, and you have to take your risks. Now, the thing is this. I think the rich also understand that the whole system might collapse, and if it does, they will lose everything. So they're willing to bargain, and they're willing to bargain within the system, which means that you can have an advantage there. It doesn't come easy, and it all depends on circumstances. It's different to negotiate when you have a crisis, when you don't have a crisis. So it's different. For example, when we came to office in 1996, everything was well in the Dominican Republic, and I wanted to follow on a fiscal reform. I wasn't able to. There was resistance, especially from the business sector. Why? Because there wasn't a crisis there. Now, if we had a crisis, and then you will be able to bargain on different circumstances. So there is the difference there. But I do think that business sectors in Latin America today are more concerned with the liberalization of the economy, with open up the markets, than with fiscal reform internally. What they think is that if you open up the market, the big multinational corporations will take their markets from them, and so they are becoming protectionists. But in terms of understanding the need to incorporate as consumers those urban poors, they understand that because in the long run they will benefit from that. At the long run they will benefit if these people are incorporated as market consumers. And the only way you can get that is having jobs for them and making them part of the system, of the economic system, which I think is also the same logic that works for the rich countries. They want to follow up on a liberalized economy because you have potential consumers from the third world that will buy goods and services coming from the industrialized world. So it's business for everyone. I think poverty is not business for anyone anymore. It's not only on philanthropic and humanistic appeal, but also in terms of economic and business sense. Someone that cannot become an economic agent is useless in this modern world. And you want to give every individual the opportunity of becoming an economic agent so that he can become a consumer and be part of the international dynamic economic process. So it's not easy. It's not something that you're going to have just because you say it, but it is possible if you are persistent, if you have clear ideas, and you engage everyone in this bargaining process.
We are coming to the close, so I'll ask for two more questions if they're brief, one and one, and then we'll...
My name is Tim. I'm from the Philippines. You mentioned in your presentation that a prerequisite for development is some kind of a capitalistic revolution. My question is the capitalism that I have experienced, and I know, at least in the Philippines, is something that has spawned some kind of a disparity between a very, very few rich and majority who are very poor, no? So that's the experience we had. I was privileged to have to go to Cuba last week, spring. I was with a group of Harvard students, and I had the chance to talk to Cardinal Jaime Ortega, the head of the Catholic Church. And relative to our discussion, he said, socialism was a failure in Cuba. He said, no, it did not work. But he also said that we also do not want to go back to the capitalism of the pre-revolution days. So my question is the choice an either or choice between socialism or capitalism as far as development is concerned, or perhaps alternative can be found somewhere along the way in developing countries?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I used on purpose the phrase capitalist revolution because it was discredited in Latin America for many years. People will say it is socialist revolution. And now we understand that the problem in Latin America was not that we had capitalism. The problem was that we lacked capitalism. And this is what I think. I think the problem with economic development in Latin America is that we have not had enough capitalism. So there is a need now to have a capitalist revolution. Now, I understand what you say. Capitalism, if market-oriented economy creates social injustice, creates disparities, I think there needs to be harmonized the relationship between state and market. A statist planned economy has its own distortions. A market-driven economy has also its weaknesses, creates disparities. So what we thought about in the Dominican Republic was coming up with a model that we call economía social de mercado, which is market social economy. It's a market social economy where we combine state and the market as the best instrument to allocate resources, but the state as the instrument to guarantee the distribution of wealth. So when you combine state and the market as a model of social economy, market social economy, when you have a social liberal state, and then you are able to reconcile those two elements of social injustice, disparity, and on the other hand, clientelistic politics coming from state. So I think it is not capitalism that creates disparity per se. I think it's a type of capitalism which is market fundamentalism. But if you are able to combine market-driven economy with an active role of the state, guaranteeing an equal distribution of the pie, then I don't think capitalism will have these weaknesses we have seen in the past.
Your question reminds me of the old definition that capitalism is the exploitation of man by man, and socialism is the other way around. Anyway, please, final question.
Hi, thanks. My name is Kerry Johnson. I'm a student at the Harvard School of Public Health. Good afternoon. I was wondering, one of my concerns with globalization is the homogenization of various indigenous cultures around the world. And I was wondering, from your experience, what you hold out as a vision for the Dominican Republic in the face of this potential homogenization of global culture, how you hope that the DR can sustain its identity, its national identity.
Well, I think that is a challenge to everyone, everywhere, because yes, I think globalization tends to create homogeneous cultures everywhere. The same blue jeans, same Coca-Cola, 7-Up everywhere in the world. You see it in China, you see it in Venezuela, everywhere. But then there are ways to preserve national values and national culture within this diversified multicultural world. I think nations should go back to study their own history. Because if you lose track of your own history, you lose your identity. But then you have your music, you have your diets, you have your national values, your national heroes, you have all this. I see now there is an interesting situation here in the United States with the 2000 census that is being released now. Hispanics are going to become the #1 minority group in the United States. So there is a cultural penetration of Hispanics into the United States. I go to New York and I hear merengue in the streets, Dominican music in the streets in New York. They have their own Dominican restaurants. They have their own Dominican culture in the United States. And I don't see that in general terms there is a rejection of the U.S. that this, you call it melting pot? Is this what it's called here? Like a mixture of all different cultures. I think it enriches the United States to have this different cultures, this diverse cultures interacting in the United States. I think it enriches us to be able to grasp on the opportunities created by globalization. What really can affect us if we renounce to our own identity just to be part of this globalization process. So once again, you have to combine, you have to mix. Preserve your own while being part of the rest of the world. I think there's a new term that's been coined now. They call it glocalization, which is a combination of globalization and localization. So it's glocalization. You have to be global and local at the same time, right? And I think this solves the problem.
Thank you very much for a wonderful start. Unless the conference organizers have anything more, I think we're adjourned till tomorrow morning.